to then carry on, if you don't mind, and let me quote something else, because I think it follows on very nicely in terms of what I'd like to hear from you. So you write in the book, millions of South African children go to bed hungry each night. Why do so many of us believe that the rights of a few corporates to make a profit are more important than they are? Why do we believe that there is no place for a human morality in our agri-food system? So for me, the question of, again, profit versus so many millions of children going hungry, and the broken food chain, how do you see this fitting in to the concept of the food chain and what we can do about it?
I think the first point to make is that it's not as if every food company executive wakes up in the morning and thinks to themselves, I wonder how we can immiserate South Africans today. They are running their businesses in a perfectly logical and rational way, which is to increase profit for shareholders. So we shouldn't say that. I think it's rather unfair to say that the retailers are kind of the enemy. Food retailers and food processors are the enemy. They are operating in a system not of their own making. And this food system that we have, which not just makes it difficult for many millions of households to feed themselves, but also makes it very difficult for people to earn a living from farming because of the constant downward pressure on the price that farmers get. Companies that operate in that sector are simply taking advantage of a structure that has been put in place through layers and layers of regulation and policy by the same government that says it is pro-poor. So this has happened because of the failure to prioritize certain basic rights. So we have a Section 27 right to food, and additionally, there's a Section 28 of the Constitution right for children to have access to adequate nutrition. But unless this is specifically taken out and prioritized, then we cannot build a system around it that is going to give effect to that. And I know that we do have social grants have made a big difference to households' ability to feed themselves, as did the COVID-19 grant. And I personally am very much in favor of social grants and basic income grants. But we have to say, is that strategy on its own the most effective way of making sure that we address the significant socioeconomic problems that are created by households not having access to sufficient food? But until we prioritize certain things, we don't get solutions to them. So there are many, many, many ways. Lots of people, when I'm having this conversation, jump up and down and say, oh, you want to nationalize like Woolworths. I'm like, no, that's, this is not, we can't say what the solution is. The solution is whatever works best in a particular context to address the problem. The solution is not something that might make things worse. But before you can start to design a solution, you have to think more carefully about the problem. So a lot of time people say to me, what's the solution? As if there's some kind of one paragraph silver bullet that someone knows in advance, and if you do these three things, that'll happen. And this is very problematic. People like simplistic analyses and simplistic solutions. They want someone to say, okay, we'll do these three things and then every problem is solved. It's not that straightforward. The most important thing is the process that you apply. And the first part of the process is to really see people's lives. It's to understand that hunger and malnutrition are not something that just kind of affect a couple of people who live out in the middle of nowhere. There are 4.3 million households, okay, a quarter of the population, that lives on an income, a total household income, that is not sufficient to purchase even the minimum amount of food that household requires. And remember, there are other things households have to spend their money on. They have to pay for municipal services, transport, accommodation. So there are 25% of South African households do not have a total income every month to spend on purchasing enough food. 50% of all South African households live below the upper bound poverty line, which means in all reality, once they have paid for their prepaid electricity, their transport, their accommodation, they do not have enough money to feed their families. We're not talking about a small group, we're talking about 50% of the population. So this is an enormous problem, and we cannot make progress until we acknowledge the severity of the problem, but then also what drives it. This is what makes me mad about do-gooders, that I'm sure they're all very do-gooders. Say, well, why doesn't everyone just grow their own food? I mean, it's just the most, and it comes from a well-meaning place, but it also comes from a bad place. It comes from a place that can't be bothered to leave your privileged space and enter the space of a family in an urban area, because the majority of hungry people live in urban areas, not in some idyllic, great for agriculture farmland somewhere where they can just conjure up meals every day. And actually understand the reality of people's lives, because we need solutions that work for the people that are experiencing these things. But there's a very, very general, I don't know even what to call it, lack of interest, I think, in the lived reality of poor people in South Africa. So there's this lack of interest in policymakers and people who are influential in understanding what the real problems are. I mean, it comes back to things like, for example, saying, we must subsidize fresh produce, for example, so that people can buy all this nice fresh produce and cook it. I mean, the reality is a woman who lives in a township and works some minimum wage job, she gets up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work. What's she going to do? Cook food for her children then? And she gets home late at night. So this idea that people in this situation live in an environment where they can, feed their families in a certain way is complete nonsense. 9 times out of 10, she can't afford the electricity for a stove to cook on. But we develop solutions that don't really deal with people's problems. So, sorry, that was a long answer to a short question. I think the most important thing is not what is the solution. The most important thing is we need to start thinking about the problem in a different way. We need to start thinking about the problem in a comprehensive way, in a systemic way, and from the point of view of the people who are actually experiencing hunger, from the point of view of people who cannot feed their children, not from, some sort of external, non-existent point of view.